They were the most powerful air force on Earth, armed with nuclear weapons, unmatched technology, and global reach. But one day, something snapped. A series of decisions so bizarre and dangerous, it's a miracle the world survived. Imagine a sky never empty, bombers circling overhead, each carrying enough firepower to end civilization. This was daily reality, a calculated risk in the name of security. But what happens when the guardians of the sky become the greatest threat? When defense systems fracture under their own weight? This is the true story of when the US Air Force lost their minds. A journey into a period where the unthinkable became policy, and the fate of millions rested on a single fragile switch. The Cold War was a battle of ideologies, fought in the shadows, where every move was a high-stakes game of espionage and brinkmanship. The world was split in two, and trust was in short supply. It was governed by the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD. A chilling logic that meant any nuclear attack would guarantee total annihilation for both sides. On one side, the Soviet Union, led by Khrushchev. On the other, the United States, under Kennedy. Two superpowers locked in a deadly standoff. Both nations were armed to the teeth, stockpiling thousands of nuclear warheads, each capable of wiping out entire cities in an instant. The fear was real. Children drilled under desks, families built fallout shelters in their backyards, and anxiety seeped into every corner of daily life. The threat of nuclear war was never far from anyone's mind. In this climate of constant tension, the Air Force launched Operation Chrome Dome, a mission that would keep bombers armed and ready at all times. The logic was simple but terrifying. If a Soviet first strike could destroy bombers on the ground, then keep them in the air, circling the globe, always ready to strike back. At any moment, a dozen B-52 bombers, each loaded with thermonuclear weapons, circled the globe, their crews on constant alert, prepared for the unthinkable. These were city killers, hundreds of times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, capable of ending millions of lives in a flash. Crews flew 24-hour missions, relying on dangerous mid-air refueling. Two massive planes full of fuel and nukes, connecting in flight, often in turbulent skies and freezing temperatures. Their routes weren't just over oceans. They flew over American towns and cities, their shadows passing silently over unsuspecting neighborhoods. The people they were meant to protect lived under a constant nuclear shadow, never knowing that doomsday could come from above at any moment. The Air Force called it a necessary evil, a failsafe. But they underestimated the risks, human error, mechanical failure, and the relentless pressure on everyone involved. The stress on planes and crews, the odds of disaster, grew with every flight. Fatigue and tension became constant companions. The public was mostly oblivious, trusting the military's perfection, unaware of the razor's edge on which they lived. But perfection is an illusion. Every flight was a gamble, a roll of the dice with unimaginable stakes. The Air Force had created a permanent airborne nuclear threat, believing it was the only way to keep the peace, but also creating a new kind of danger. In doing so, they set the stage for disaster, not from an enemy attack, but from a routine accident over a peaceful town. The disaster was inevitable, a ticking time bomb hidden in plain sight. On January 24, 1961, the inevitable happened. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours, a routine military flight turned into a nightmare that would haunt the small towns of North Carolina for decades. A B-52 bomber, loaded with nuclear weapons, broke apart mid-air over the countryside, scattering debris and dropping two Mark 39 hydrogen bombs toward the earth below. One bomb's parachute deployed, miraculously slowing its fall and allowing it to land gently in a tree, its deadly payload suspended above the ground. The other bomb, however, plummeted at nearly 700 miles per hour, slamming into a muddy field and disintegrating on impact, scattering radioactive material deep into the earth. Within hours, the military descended on the crash site, telling locals they were searching for lost plane parts and nothing more. In reality, they were racing against time to recover the shattered nuclear core before it could be discovered, or worse, cause a catastrophe. Despite their efforts, the core was never fully found. To this day, a piece of a hydrogen bomb remains buried beneath a North Carolina field. a silent reminder of what almost happened. The bomb that landed intact was even more terrifying. It had gone through nearly its entire arming sequence, just one step away from detonation. Of the 6 safety mechanisms designed to prevent disaster, 5 failed in the chaos of the crash. Only a single, cheap electrical switch, never meant to be the last line of defense, stood between North Carolina and nuclear annihilation. The entire incident was immediately classified top secret, locked away in government files and hidden from the public eye. Newspapers never reported the truth. The people living just miles from disaster never knew how close they came to losing everything. The Air Force's lesson was chillingly pragmatic. Improve the switches, but keep the bombers flying. The missions would continue, despite the risks. Operation Chrome Dome continued, sending bombers armed with nuclear weapons circling the globe. Nuclear roulette in the sky. Goldsboro was not the only close call. There were many so-called broken arrow incidents, accidents involving nuclear weapons that could have changed history in an instant. Each mission was a roll of the dice with the fate of the planet, a gamble with unimaginable stakes. The secrecy was total, creating a false sense of security for the public, while the risks quietly mounted behind closed doors. The shield meant to protect America was broken, its hidden flaws threatening the very people it was meant to defend, leaving a legacy of danger buried in the heartland. If airborne nukes seemed reckless, what the Air Force built on the ground was pure madness. Enter Project Pluto, a nuclear-powered supersonic low-altitude missile, the Flying Crowbar. Its heart was a nuclear ramjet engine, a flying reactor spewing radioactive exhaust as it flew. The SLAM could stay airborne for weeks, dropping up to 16 hydrogen bombs on multiple cities. After its bombing run, it would continue flying, contaminating everything below, before crashing its reactor into a final target. Engineers actually built and tested the engine in Nevada. It worked. But the horror of the concept became clear. How do you test a weapon that can't be stopped, that poisons everything in its path? The risks were too great. Project Pluto was canceled in 1964. ICBMs made it obsolete, but the real reason was its uncontrollable, apocalyptic nature. Even Cold War planners realized this weapon was too insane to exist. As the Cold War escalated, the battlefield expanded to space. The U.S. Air Force, desperate to outdo the Soviets, proposed Project A-119, detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. The plan: launch a missile, explode a warhead on the lunar surface, and create a visible mushroom cloud, an act of cosmic intimidation. Carl Sagan, then a young astronomer, was brought in to study the effects. Scientists were horrified. The explosion would contaminate the moon and destroy priceless scientific opportunities. Fears of public backlash and technical failure killed the project in 1959. But the ambition to weaponize space didn't end. The Air Force envisioned orbital battle stations and nuclear-armed satellites. The ultimate dream: space-based lasers, powered by nuclear explosions, to shoot down enemy missiles. These plans blurred the line between deterrence and cosmic aggression. The sky was no longer the limit. Space itself became a potential battlefield. While moon bombs and flying reactors were debated in secret rooms far from the public eye, another threat was quietly unfolding. Operation Chrome Dome's real danger struck not on battlefields, but in the heart of small, unsuspecting towns. In 1966, high above the coast of Spain, a B-52 bomber collided with a refueling tanker, igniting a disaster that would haunt the region for decades. 4 hydrogen bombs plummeted from the sky, 3 landing on Spanish soil, 1 vanishing into the Mediterranean Sea. 2 of the bomb's conventional explosives detonated on impact, blasting radioactive plutonium dust across the quiet farming village of Palomares. The U.S. military rushed in, scraping up tons of contaminated soil and shipping it across the Atlantic to America for disposal. But the invisible poison of plutonium lingered in the earth, the air, and the lives of the villagers. Meanwhile, the 4th bomb was missing. After an 80-day search involving deep-sea submersibles and international headlines, it was finally found at the bottom of the Mediterranean. Palomares became infamous as the site of the worst radiological contamination event of the entire Cold War era. Just 2 years later, disaster struck again. Another B-52, this time near Thule, Greenland, crashed after a fire broke out on board. All 4 hydrogen bombs exploded on impact, vaporizing tons of ice and scattering radioactive debris across the frozen wilderness. Cleanup crews, many lacking proper protection, braved the Arctic darkness and cold, only to suffer radiation illnesses in the years that followed. These disasters proved that no one was truly safe, not even in the world's most remote and peaceful places. The mounting cost, the ever-present risk, and the political fallout finally forced the end of Chrome Dome in 1968. But for the people who lived through it, the damage was already done. Fields ruined, lives upended, and futures forever changed. Ordinary people in quiet towns became the forgotten casualties of the nuclear gamble, their stories a haunting reminder of the true cost of Cold War brinkmanship. Looking back, the Air Force wasn't just preparing for war, they were gambling with the planet's very survival, risking everything for the sake of deterrence and power. Nuclear bombs in the sky, flying reactors, even plans for moon explosions. These were real projects, not just science fiction or wild imagination. The Cold War's logic created a kind of institutional madness, blurring the line between protector and destroyer, between safety and annihilation. In trying to prevent apocalypse, they brought us right to its very doorstep, closer than most people ever realized. The stories of Goldsboro, Palomares, and Thule show just how easily complex systems can fail and how disaster can come from a single mistake. Our survival often depended on luck, a single cheap switch, or the smallest margin of error. The Cold War is over, but its legacy still echoes above us, lingering in the sky and in our collective memory. The greatest threats may not come from enemies, but from the terrifying power of our own weapons and the choices we make about them.